Let's talk about one of the most brutal wars in Roman history. It's called the Social War. But that name is a little misleading. See, social comes from the Latin word socii, which means allies. And that right there gets to the heart of this whole crazy conflict. This wasn't a war for independence. It was a vicious 3-year-long war fought for the exact opposite, for inclusion.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around this. Imagine you're a soldier. You have spent your life fighting and bleeding for an empire, pushing its borders, defending its people. But then you come home, and you have zero say in how it's run. No vote, no protection under its laws. This was the absolutely bizarre and desperate spot Rome's Italian allies found themselves in back in 91 BC. They weren't trying to tear Rome down. They were fighting tooth and nail to become a part of it.
So how on earth did things get this bad? Well, to really get the war, you have to understand this deep, fundamental inequality that was just baked into the Roman Republic. For hundreds of years, Rome had built its empire on the backs of its Italian allies, the Socii. And the deal was, well, it was completely lopsided. For every single Roman legionary, the allies had to provide at least one, and a lot of the time, 2 soldiers. They were the engine of Rome's military machine. And what did they get in return? No vote, no legal protection if a Roman official decided to push them around, and absolutely no say in the foreign policy that they were the ones dying for.
You know, for a surprisingly long time, this system kind of held together. But by the late 2nd century BC, you could see the cracks starting to form. Roman magistrates were getting more and more arrogant, more abusive. There were constant fights over public land, where allies would get kicked off their farms to make way for Roman citizens. The allies were starting to feel less like partners and more like servants, and their patience was just about gone.
So right before everything explodes, there was one last dramatic shot at fixing this whole mess with politics instead of swords. And it all came down to one very determined Roman noble.
His name was Marcus Livius Drusus the Younger. Now this guy was a total insider, a Roman tribune from one of the most powerful families. But he looked at the situation with the allies and saw not just an injustice, but a huge danger. So in 91 BC, he proposes this massive reform package. It had a bit of everything: land reform, court changes, but the absolute centerpiece, the part that gave the Italians hope, was a simple promise: full Roman citizenship for all of them.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The Roman historian Velleius Paterculus summed it up perfectly. He said their cause was most just. I mean, think about it. They weren't asking to be given the world. They were just asking for a voice in the government they were defending with their own blood.
But in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, what's fair is often seen as a threat. Think about it. Giving the vote to hundreds of thousands of new citizens, that would completely flip the political table. The Roman elite, we're talking senators, wealthy businessmen, they saw this as a direct attack on their grip on power, and they decided to fight Drusus with everything they had.
And just like that, the whole thing fell apart. In early 91 BC, there was real hope. By the middle of the year, the Senate used a legal trick to just cancel all of his laws. And by the end of the year, Drusus himself was stabbed to death by an assassin in his own house. With his death, the last chance for a peaceful solution was gone, vanished.
Drusus's murder was the spark that lit the fuse. The allies had tried to play by the rules. They'd found a champion inside the system, and they watched him get murdered for it. What other choice did they have? It was time for war.
And the rebellion needed a leader. Enter Quintus Popedius Silo. He was a leader of the Marsi, one of the toughest tribes in Italy. But more than that, he was a personal friend of Drusus. He had backed his reforms. So when his friend was killed, Silo went from a political player to a general. He became what one historian called the heart and soul of the entire rebellion.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. The rebels got organized. They formed their own state, a confederation they called Italia. But look at how they set it up. They didn't make a king or invent some new government. They copied the Roman Republic down to the last detail. They had their own senate, they elected 2 consuls, and Silo was one of them. This was the ultimate message. They weren't saying we reject Rome, they were saying we are just as Roman as you are.
And make no mistake, these rebels were tough. Silo wasn't just passionate, he was brilliant. There's this one amazing story about an ambush. He goes to the Roman general Caepio and pretends he wants to switch sides. As a sign of good faith, he hands over these heavy bars of gold and silver, which were really just lead with a thin plating. He tells Caepio the rebel army is in chaos without a leader, and that it's the perfect time to attack. He then leads the entire Roman force into a hidden ravine, gives a signal, and his army, which was hiding the whole time, comes out and just wipes them out. The Italians weren't just angry, they were very, very good at war.
So the war raged on for 2 bloody years. The casualties were enormous on both sides, and honestly, Rome was in trouble. They realized that trying to win this thing on the battlefield alone was going to be way too costly, maybe even impossible. So they decided to switch tactics and play to their greatest strength, political maneuvering.
So, in 90 BC, the consul Lucius Julius Caesar, the famous Caesar's uncle, proposes a law called the Lex Julia. And this thing was a work of pure political genius. It offered full Roman citizenship to any of the allies who had stayed loyal. But here's the brilliant part. It also offered citizenship to any of the rebels who agreed to immediately lay down their arms.
You see, the Lex Julia wasn't some generous peace offering. It was a weapon, a political weapon designed to shatter the rebellion from the inside. It instantly rewarded the loyal allies, making sure they'd never even think about switching sides. It gave the rebels who were getting tired of the fighting a perfect exit ramp. They could get exactly what they'd been fighting for without another drop of blood. And it left the hardliners, the guys who wanted to fight to the bitter end, totally isolated. It was a classic case of divide and conquer.
And wow, did it work. The effect was immediate. The rebellion just started to fall apart. Town after town saw the offer on the table and laid down their weapons. I mean, why keep fighting a brutal war for something that was now being handed to you on a silver platter?
So, mission accomplished, right? The Italians got what they wanted. The war was over and they were finally citizens. But, as with most things in Roman history, it's not quite that simple. Getting the title of citizen was one thing. Getting actual power was a whole different fight.
First, let's just appreciate the scale of this change. The laws passed during and after this war nearly tripled the number of Roman citizens. This was a gigantic shift. The Republic went from basically being a single city that ruled over subjects to a much more unified Italian nation. The whole game had changed.
But the fight wasn't over for everyone. Palpatius Silo, the heart and soul of it all, he refused to give up. He and the last of the hardliners fought on. But with their alliance shattered, it was a losing battle. He was eventually defeated and killed in 88 BC, a really tragic end for the man who started it all.
And here's the final twist, the fine print in the contract. Rome granted the citizenship, yes, but it came with a catch. They took all these hundreds of thousands of new citizens and enrolled them in just a few of the 35 official voting tribes. What did that mean? Well, it meant that while every new citizen technically had a vote, their collective voice was quarantined. They could never, ever outvote the old Roman citizens. It was a classic move, give with one hand and take away with the other. So the Italians won the war. They were now legally Romans. But their struggle for real, actual political equality, that was just getting started, and it would fuel the next generation of Roman civil wars. It really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? What's the real difference between having a title and actually having the power that's supposed to go with it?